Do you remember what it felt like as a child? Saying goodnight, watching the lights turn out and your bedroom door close, and laying alone in the dark, wondering if tonight would be the night that the ever so frightening monsters underneath the bed might decide to show their face? How real did the idea of monsters become once the light from the hallway disappeared? And if you feared these monsters, what about them scared you? Was it the physical harm they may cause? Or was it that you might not be able to scream for help because to others these monsters are imaginary? Did it ever scare you that if you were to see a monster, you may go your whole life with no one believing you?
When I was 5 years old, whether or not monsters were lurking underneath my bed was a primary concern. Many nights did I lay awake making every mathematical calculation in order to quantify my behavior the previous day, good behavior from bad behavior, all in an attempt to determine any kind of predictability about the emergence of a monster. I understood the prerequisites for the archetypal characters who were real and who did get to exist. The holiday season brought Santa, springtime cued the Easter Bunny, and the event of losing a tooth summoned the Tooth Fairy. When asking questions about monsters, I often received short, unsatisfactory responses, iterating that my fears were unnecessary and of something unreal, that there was nothing to be afraid of. Any further worry, and I received harsher feedback, that I was being irrational or ridiculous, but it didn't add up to me. Why was I supposed to blindly accept and innately believe in a fairy, simultaneously rejecting a monster? In the movies I saw, they often existed together. It was at this age that I realized the way that I perceived the world both differed and contradicted the way that most around me did. And my 5-year-old brain wasn't sure what it was realizing, aside from comprehending that a significant number of its thoughts and concerns weren't ones that should be shared or spoken aloud. I realized further, no one seemed to hear me, even in the absence of an impairment. Without my words validated, it felt as though no one can see me.
As an adult, I've realized that we older, established humans hold the power of determining what is real from what is not. We use this then to define the ordinary, normal, the standard. And whatever we can't fit into these rigid yet abstract categories is left over, and we use what's left over to define the disordered, the crazy, and the invalid. Our beliefs, our perspectives, inner conflicts, and shadows are nearly completely responsible for influencing and defining the tone in which a child comes to understand him or herself and differences in thought or behavior. This in turn influences the way that a child perceives their own lived experience in an environment or environments as a whole. If a child is insistent on asking questions about the potential monsters under their bed, recognize that to them, these creatures are simply a flip side of the same coin that ingrains within them the idea that a fairy visits them at night after they lose a tooth. Adults around me had the opportunity to listen to my concerns and fears about the potential of monsters, and my uneasiness surrounding the inconsistency in recognition of folk characters. And these adults had the opportunity to simply offer me a physical hug, whether they understood my words and my fears or not. Rarely, if ever, was the comfort of those with more power around me set aside to make room for my own. Never was my truth paid any more mind to than in its misalignment with the adults I interacted with. Moments when my 5-year-old words sounded the craziest or the most made up were moments when the script had the potential to be flipped in either direction, extraordinary and disorderly. are both terms used to describe a significant deviation from the norm in question. A thought or fear that is so deviant from the norm could belong to a child who is gifted as opposed to disorderly. I figured out that it is the comfort of those in power which influences the way in which the script gets flipped. In my case, the script was flipped in the direction of the latter term, and at a young age, I came to understand who I was as a disruption. At 23 years old, I realized the only disruption myself and my existence have caused is to the rigid comfort zones of the once big people around me.
All right. My name is Fiona. I grew up in San Francisco, California with my mother, my father, and my twin brother, who I was born 1 minute after, and he will never let me live it down. I graduated with a major in sociology. I minored in economics and I minored in special education. Special education was my favorite and my kind of particular subject that I wanted to hone in on, specifically towards the end of college when I figured out that it was an option, because I have been in special education for most of my life as a child and most of the time of childhood that I was super aware of. So I was diagnosed with an EBD, an emotional behavioral disorder, major depressive disorder. So starting as a kid, it kind of felt like no one's talking to me. Nobody's communicating to me. I don't know why my primary caregivers are leaving. I don't know when they're coming back. And it feels like I'm not good enough for them to stay. It feels like when I tell them that I'm anxious, they're going to go on a business trip, come back, and then console me about it or comfort me about it. And I think growing up, over time, like I had these anxieties, I had these feelings and questions about the world that I didn't see other kids around me having. I remember being 5 years old and knowing kind of what possibility was, not just being able to think, but also to think about my own thoughts. I think my metacognitive processes were a little bit ahead of a lot of people where I was, and I couldn't resonate with them. I couldn't relate to them, and I couldn't create this bridge that bridged like basically my existence with theirs. And there was always an element of feeling a little bit disconnected from my best friend next to me when we were 5 years old. That made me feel really lonely. And I used physical proximity as a way to mend that or to mitigate that going on. I feel like I made a lot of friends with whom I did not resonate with. I didn't feel close to the people at home. And by the time that I developed the emotional behavioral disorder that I did, the first of a couple, that was kind of a result of me feeling like I can't get my parents' attention in any way. My depression resulted from adverse childhood experiences. The story that I told for a long time, and one that was kind of brought to fruition by my parents when I was younger, was that once I went through puberty, my hormones shifted and my neurotransmitters changed in such a way that kind of created these avenues for the emergence of disorders that I'd been predisposed to. I do have suicidality that runs in my family. I have anorexia that runs in my family. I have depression that runs in my family, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. It didn't seem as though depression had evolved from anything other than genetic factors. I do think genetic factors had a bit of an influence, but I think that I felt as though there was no space in the world for me. I felt as though my parents didn't want me. I fully feel like I was both loved and resented for most of my childhood. And I do think that that made me feel very alone. I feel like I, at the age of 23, kind of experienced what love was for the first time from people who actually offered it with unconditionality. And I think being depressed, I was looking at all these people around me when I was younger, and I was like, there is no way that I am one of them. There's no way that I am one of these humans that I'm seeing because I'm so disconnected from them. And if that's the case, then maybe I should like test if I'm even human by being suicidal. I think it was a little bit of like not even the depression and the sadness that drove me there, but really believing that I could not be the same kind of species as everybody that I was seeing because of how disconnected I felt. And I didn't want to be part of a world that I felt like I didn't belong in. So my K through 12 education experience started on a chipper note and it ended on a brilliant note. When I graduated 12th grade, I think that was the first time that I had beat something. I had beaten odds and I had done what I was told was impossible to do. Kindergarten was kind of a gentle time. I feel like one of my more gentle times, and that was almost one of the last times that I remember feeling really playful as a kid. I think age 5 was kind of where the dial turned down on feeling really playful and being really playful, because I started to think more about the possibilities in life and having more anxieties about the possibility in life. But K through 5, I attended a public elementary school. Getting 2 years with the same people really helped me integrate myself into that school and feel a little bit more secure moving forward after that. I started to feel emphases of being really lonely in the world. I would have a disagreement with my friends on the playground and I would want to go home. And I thought it was a completely normal thought for every 4th and 5th grader to not get along with their buddies at school and go home and contemplate suicide on a serious note. I kind of thought there was nothing wrong with my thought because of that. I hadn't talked to anybody about it, and I didn't suspect that not every peer had the same thoughts as I did. Middle school was pretty rough, actually pretty brutal. I don't remember very much of it because I was taking a lot of medications, but it was hard. The program that I went to, I was at the first program for 8 months, and I was sent there after being sent to the hospital, admitted to the hospital under California's code 5150. And 5150 is when you're a danger to yourself. If you have either left a suicide note, if you've made a plan, if you have attempted suicide, you are 5150. And after 5 of these hospitalizations, the state of California essentially deemed me not healthy enough to go home underneath my parents' care. So they discharged me at midnight, and I was supposed to fly directly to Utah, but my parents did sneak me home, and I was able to grab a stuffed animal and a pair of clothes, and then I went. And I spent the next 8 months there. It was really lonely. I remember just the first night there, looking up at the ceiling and being like, it is you versus you, and it is you, and you have to have enough hope for yourself and everybody who was supposed to have it in you and didn't, because I didn't quite align with everything that they were telling me that I had. I understood depression and I understood suicidality, but I felt like a monster. I felt like the worst person on earth. I felt like somebody who had done something so wrong and was treated so poorly because of it. During my time there, I was on a number of medications, around 8 probably. I was not passing any tests in school. I had to sit on something called academic probation, which is called APO there. And APO means that I spend every moment that we are in the living house where we lived facing a wall by the office. And that meant upwards of 8 hours or 9 hours a day just spent facing this wall. I mean, I must have mapped out every single bump on it because I got so bored. And they had a Super Bowl party behind me, and they made food and they cheered, and I could not turn more than this much to see it. I think I lost a lot of my love for knowledge when I was there because I feel like a lot of it, I was just told that I wasn't good enough to be able to kind of partake in.
Yeah, I can see how hard it is to talk about some of this stuff, and so I wanted to thank you for pushing through that.
Thank you. It's getting easier. It's just when I sit in that memory too long, it gets a little hard. That experience was one that is still really difficult for me to kind of jump back into. When I think too long about it, it gets a little harder. But I made it through that, and it forever changed me for sure. With that said, I was able to start high school in something called a counseling enriched classroom. They had 3 different special ed classrooms. They had one for kids who had disabilities where they could not walk, they could not speak. Some of them had feeding tubes. And one of my counseling enriched classroom was for kids like myself who had depression, who had anxiety, who had any kind of disorder on the mental spectrum, anything in the EBD category. So I was one of 3 classrooms there, and I was allowed to leave residential on the agreement that I would join this classroom and that I would go to this school, which was in my school district, but it was not my high school that was closest to my house. So I did a little bit of an inter-district transfer. I went to this high school. My twin brother came with me, although not in the classroom. And we started at a school that we knew nobody from middle school, and we knew nobody from elementary school. And it felt like a little bit of a clean slate. I will say that the counseling enriched classroom, it was such a great resource to have for students like myself. I personally wanted out of there more than I wanted in. I had met my first best friends at the time, and I feel like the first people who kind of, again, taught me unconditional love and taught me what it feels like to really believe in someone. So I think I was just able to open up and be a bit more joking with the people who loved me for me. And I'm able to kind of show a little bit more of my quirkiness and a little bit more of my character. And with that said, I was talking about graduating high school. Basically, I wanted out of the special education classroom, although I loved it, and I was able to take something called academic workshop all throughout high school, even when I graduated from that classroom. After doubling up on subjects and tripling up on subjects, I was able to do what I once was told impossible. And I graduated as the first student from the counseling enriched classroom going straight to a 4-year. And my vice principal approached me towards the end of high school, towards graduation, and she said, Fiona, do you mind if we use your name as an example for all of the students who are going to be coming into the counseling enriched classroom going here on out? We've never had a student graduate the classroom going straight to a 4-year. And that felt really amazing. And I think that is one of the biggest leadership roles that I've been able to take in my childhood growing up, in my teenage years, is just beating the odds, doing what they said was impossible, and graduating as that first student.
Really inspiring stuff.
Thank you. I wish that my teachers knew how interested I was in the subjects that they were teaching, and how I felt like there were other forces in my life that made me feel very inadequate in the classroom and made me feel as though I wasn't smart and I didn't want to showcase that. And I wish I could have given some kind of indicator for a teacher to come over and be like, I can tell you're passionate about this subject. How do I help you dive into it? I wish that teachers knew the amount of medication that I was on in my life, because I really feel like it's not talked about. And if you're going to give a student a D, like, know who that student is before you give them that D. I think I wish that they could have been clued in a little bit somehow, either by myself or others, about the things that were going on in my brain that I didn't have any control over. Because to me, it would have been a bit evident, but maybe I didn't show it on the outside. I also wish that my teachers knew that I really wanted adults to be curious in me. I think I would have loved to just experience and receive a little bit more curiosity and a little bit less what felt like self-doubt at the time from my teachers. But I wish that they knew that I love to learn, and I wish that they knew the amount of medications that could have been interfering with my classroom performance.
How do you identify with the label of a behavioral disorder?
In short, I do identify with it as part of my identity, largely because my identity is not only composed of my self-identity, but of my identity to others. If I succeed at anything, she's taking her medications, thank goodness. She's doing this, thank goodness. She's taking care of herself, thank goodness. If I fail at something, is she taking her medications? Is she doing this? Is she doing that? And so I know that depression and emotional behavioral disorders are a very big part of at least people in my kind of more formative years, their perception of me now. I think it is a part of my identity in the sense that it has very much fueled the person that I've become today. I don't know yet if I still feel like I have essence of depression, if I still feel like I have essence of anxiety. I do know that I was kind of suspected of having bipolar disorder. I was treated for schizophrenia, although it wasn't a diagnosis. So I feel like there's essence. The bipolar 2 disorder, I do feel maybe I embody a couple of traits of every now and then, but I would say that I align a little bit more with the notion of twice exceptional children, which are just children with a disorder and children with a gift at the same time. When my IQ was taken as a kid, I produced a superior score verbally for a 14-year-old or 13-year-old. And I think those kind of things would have been indicators to me as a parent. Maybe my kid isn't super depressed. Maybe I have this, in a sense, special child who just needs different modifications for them. And they're becoming depressed because I'm not meeting those. Depression specifically, I think, can manifest in so many different ways. And I think what people don't realize about people with depression is that sometimes that person is a gifted person. Sometimes that person feels like they don't fit in, but for reasons that could be dealt with differently than assuming depression is the root of it. So I think people don't realize that sometimes the depression, the diagnosis in and of itself, is nothing more than a symptom of something else that's going on and causing a mass amount of trauma for someone. I think depression was a huge trauma response for me for feeling so isolated and like there was such little space for me in the world. So I think just opening up the idea and the narrative to depression not being the root of it and genetic predisposition not being just the root of it, but it being a symptom for something like a child with abilities that they don't even know how to handle yet in a positive way. When anybody asks me, what do you want to do with your life? I automatically say, I want to change the world. And my hope for the future is to kind of work towards this big goal of mine to kind of be able to affect a generation of people around the globe and move individuals and move societies basically about kind of just the way that we interact as people. I think I'd really like to change. I would love for there to be more love in the world. And by love, I mean the kind where we don't put once I met friends that didn't put me down and that took my bad decisions with me and helped me become a better person, I was like, I feel like the most capable person ever. And all it is that I had friends who told me that I was and who instilled in me that I was. And I think if it was that easy for my friends in my life to make me feel like I'm this great, then I can be able to do that to the next person. And if people can impact each other by just meeting, then I should be able to go out to the world and impact people the same way, or at least share about how I had people impact me. If I could go back and tell 13-year-old me that the nights that I spent alone in isolation in residential, the nights that I cried myself to sleep in the hospital psych ward, I'm telling the story that I couldn't open my mouth about without being sent away when I was younger. If I said this when I was younger, it would have been to the next residential. And I'm telling the story to people who want to hear it. I'm telling the story to people who admire me for it. And I think I would love to tell 13-year-old me, I'm proud of you. And I hope you're proud of me.